Good evening and welcome very, very much to this segment of Conversations, where I'm very pleased to be able to be testing the Intercontinental Hotel ComSat video conferencing service to London in this rather extraordinary episode of Conversations. And we have on this particular program video conferencing capability to London, England, where we have a number of four gentlemen who represent, in a very real sense, the telecommunications developments in Britain, which are of great interest to the people within the industry and certainly to the general citizenry. And if I could, I would like to introduce the guests there in London and then see if we couldn't get into a discussion of telecommunication development, particularly talking some about the alternate technologies that are beginning to have a real play there, or real importance in terms of the British development. If I may, in the picture, we have now a picture coming from London, and on the right of the screen at the head of the table we have Peter Marshall, and Peter Marshall is the Director General, is that correct, of Viznews, General Manager of Viznews in London. And Peter, welcome very, very much to Conversations indeed.
Thank you, nice to be with you.
And on Peter's right we have Brian Haynes, and Brian Haynes is the Chairman of, correct me if I'm wrong now, Brian, it's the Satellite Broadcasting Corporation, or Satellite Communications Corporation.
Satellite television.
Terribly sorry, Satellite Television Corporation. I'm sorry. Welcome very, very much. Brian has been long interested in the development of satellite development of broadcasting direct signals into the British system, and welcome. And if I may, then, on the left of the table we have Mr. John Chittock. Is this correct? The writer on film and video for the Financial Times, and
sort of bullseye.
Yeah, the London Times. And Mr. Chittock, welcome very, very much to Conversation. And finally, we have on the other side of the table, then we have Mr. Melleish, Nicholas Melleish, who is the program director for Redifussion Corporation, a major cable entity there in Britain. And gentlemen, welcome very, very much to Conversations indeed. I might just say that we have here in New York with us, on my immediate left, we had Ed Halfer, and again, as I indicated, we had Mr. Andrew Ailes. Welcome, yeah, I should zoom out. Welcome very, very much, gentlemen, to Conversations. You have a development of alternate technologies, or cable television, and some of the alternate technologies is a major issue, as I understand it, in terms of the overall development of the British economy. There was a report, the Hunt report, that came out more recently. Is that still a basic document to which we can refer when trying to understand telecommunications development, and this in recognition of the fact that there is soon to be put out a white paper by the Home Office? But I wonder generally if you might indicate, is the Hunt report a pretty good takeoff point for trying to understand the relationship with the various new technologies in the British economy?
Up to a point, except that some of its recommendations are already being superseded, but I don't know if you've got a copy of it there, but it in summary identifies some of the issues.
I think in general you want to remember that the Hunt report was designed and became a report by a government committee on the impact of an expansion of cable television on broadcasting. So while it does touch on, for example, satellite distribution of television signals, it isn't really relevant at all if you're talking about video discs, for example, or indeed, to a very large degree, on direct broadcasting by satellite. It is essentially a cable document. Since it came out at the end of September, there's been a lot of debate over here about its recommendations. You're quite right in saying that the government is planning to publish a white paper in the next month or so, setting out in some detail, we understand, its policies for the development of cable. So at the moment over here there's quite a guessing game going on as to what the government will actually say when it has something to say.
The white paper is likely to be involved with some other aspects of the newer technologies, including perhaps direct broadcast satellite, or home video cassette development, or some of these other developments, as well as cable broadcast interface, as it were.
Well,
To interject there, the white paper that's coming is in response to the Hunt report, but we have a proliferation, are having a proliferation of government reports on various aspects of the media. One of the things that some of us are not happy about is that we believe that there should be a greater coordination of government views. Another report, for example, that we're waiting on, which some people believe is of fundamental relevance to cable, is one in regard to the British film industry. Our Minister of State at the Department of Industry, Mr. Ian Sproat, has promised to make major proposals and recommendations regarding the film industry when, I quote, the leaves are on the trees.
I think
So all of these things really should intermesh. One of our problems in Britain at the moment is that they're not intermeshing very well.
There are a lot of things going on here at the moment, as you've indicated, Harold, in your remarks just now. The point about the Hunt report was that it was the first official indication of government policy towards the expansion of cable in this country. It pointed the direction. And what the white paper is going to do when it comes out is now refine it and give all those involved in cable in Britain some clear indications of both the pace and the direction of cable expansion. And Nicholas Melleish here from Redifussion, of course, is one of us who is most directly involved in that particular expansion. And perhaps he might tell us what he expects to see in the white paper.
yes, please.
Well, I know what we'd like to see in the white paper, and that is that we as cable operators would like the government to give us a green light to install new sophisticated cable networks and to be able to operate them with the minimum amount of restriction. I think a lot of the debate at the moment centres on the degree of restriction in terms of content, quotas for British products, amounts and control of advertising, the role of local municipalities in authorising cable and so on. And all these crucial areas at the moment are still unknown. As I say, we know what we'd like to see. Various other pressure groups know what they would like to see. And a lot of this advice to the government is obviously completely contradictory. And the government at the moment is just trying to sort it out and work out what they do want to see happen. I think the one thing that is clear is that the present government is very committed to an expansion of cable services in this country because they see, rightly I think, cable as being the necessary infrastructure to create a new society based on information technology. Once you have a cable plant in the ground, you can hope to create a completely new industry of information technology. And that point, I think, is clear so far, but they're obviously finding the subject a little more complicated than they thought at first when they sat down to look at it. And they're trying to examine the implications of such an expansion, not only on broadcasting, but on the film business, as Peter Marshall was saying, and all sorts of other aspects of life over here.
Yes, it certainly does, because it could be the nervous system of an informationally oriented technology in information era that we're entering now. Could you give us an idea of how many of the people there in Britain, or what the dimensions of cable penetration is in the British system?
Well, with the existing networks, well, let's see now, we've got about 20 million television homes in this country, and there's something in the order
2.6 million.
of about 2.6 million homes are connected to regular commercial cable networks. And then in addition, there are quite a number of networks operated by municipalities and housing associations and so on. But the important thing to recognize about the existing cable plant is that most of it was put down 15, 20 years ago, and generally speaking, it only has the capacity to distribute 4 or 6 television channels. So
I think what should be stressed for American viewers is that this existing network has always operated under a restriction about the sort of programs it could relay. Basically, they have been the normally available broadcast programs, plus one or two perhaps commercial programs that were outside the normal reception area, and under certain conditions one or two locally originated community programs. What is important about the government's thinking now, and what of course people like Mr. Melleish and the company he represents are eager to see happen, is that these restrictions will be lifted, and we now do have a beginning of that lifting of restriction, where some of these networks have now are now being allowed to transmit feature films on a subscription service. And so the government white paper, which is in the pipeline, it is assumed that will liberate the cable operators that exist at the moment and provide the way ahead for all kinds of commercial cable services. But there are other issues involved as well, because the impact that this is going to have on broadcast television in this country and on the film industry in this country is causing some controversy. One of the things that we have enjoyed in Britain that perhaps is unfamiliar to you in the States is that we have been getting a very high quality television service very cheaply indeed. And what cable is going to do, perhaps, is to start to put a more realistic value on the quality of our entertainment. The broadcasters are obviously worried about this because they see that they're going to be priced out of the market, perhaps, for some material. The film industry is worried about it as well, because, or at least the cinema industry, because they see cable as a threat to the film industry. And there's no doubt about it that, as one of our more distinguished filmmakers, David Putnam, has said, he sees that the future of the film industry in Britain getting most of its revenue from sources other than the cinema. And the cinema will become a kind of specialised art showcase for the promotion of a film, because the cinema is still needed in order to make the public get this sort of showbiz awareness of films. But most of their revenue in the future will come perhaps from cable, but perhaps maybe from video release. But the moment we haven't brought video into it, and it's a very important aspect of it.
Oh, I see. I might just interject here that the cable universe in the United States, which is now up to over 30% of the nation being cabled, has been in a very real sense driven in its programming by the first-run feature film of our paid premium services, home box office, and Showtime and so forth. But there is also a news content or an information content to the overall pattern of telecommunications, which is also to be figured in terms of the pattern of telecommunications development in the future. You gentlemen are closely aware with that, being involved with Viznews and so forth. But of course the film, you're quite right, the film has been a major driving force for it, and we do have film being made for that first run, full run feature films being made for that medium now here in the United States, just beginning to happen.
There's one observation I would make which tends to get overlooked when talking about cable television and satellite television, for that matter, in Britain. It's too easy for people to imagine that what has happened in America will necessarily prevail in the UK. But the circumstances in Britain are very different on at least two important respects. And number one, at the risk of being slightly arrogant, I think it's been generally agreed that our broadcast television service over the last 25 years has been of an outstanding quality. And for that reason, there hasn't been perhaps the same pressures on the public as perhaps existed in the States, to have a greater range of choice of material, because at least the limited choice we've had is generally provided pretty good material. The other factor which makes the British situation different in regard to cable television from the States is the extraordinarily high penetration of the video industry in the UK. We've now probably got the highest penetration of video recorders per TV household of any country in the world, bar except one or two quirky ones in the Middle East. And it's quite easy now for people to go out and buy, rent a movie for £1.50 a night. That's $1. for a night. And about 1 in 5 TV households in Britain, over 1 in 5 in Britain now have got video recorders. So
That is interesting.
that puts a different kind of complexion on the prospects of cable television in Britain.
So it might make a difference in terms of the pattern of development there in Britain relating to filmic fare.
To what?
To film or to cinema fare as programming content for, television or cable television or subscription television delivery to the home. The fact that there is such a large penetration of the home video cassettes, and it seems to have taken on at such a high rate of penetration in that technology itself.
Well, you see, this is my point. You see that cable arrived in America before the video revolution. In our case, video arrived before cable, and so I think the circumstances are somewhat different.
I wonder if I could, if Brian Haynes, developing the direct broadcast satellite, perhaps he could talk a little bit about that venture and where he feels that is going to fit in. We've been talking a great deal about cable, but direct broadcast satellite capability is something that's beginning to happen here in the United States. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about that, Brian, if you would. I'd appreciate it.
Yes, well, there's a follow-on from your points on the Hunt Committee, which apply to the UK, that in France and in Germany and in the Scandinavian countries, they've also had reports similar to Hunt, and their governments have seen that the possibility, they believe, of employing large number of people to dig up the road means that they have plans to, quote, cable half their countries by 1990. Now, whether the investment will follow, I somewhat doubt myself, but certainly there's a great interest in Europe. So all that we've heard from the UK applies over Europe, and the point of that is that our satellites have such large beams that their signals also fall over Europe. So although there's plans for a British DB satellite, its energy does in fact power all the continental cable systems if the program rights can be purchased. At the moment we have flying some low-power satellites which can connect to dishes which are smaller than those you use in America. In Europe we can pick up satellite television on 2 to 3 meter dishes today, and our particular company is actually on air this moment, and we've got viewers in the Arctic Circle and the Mediterranean watching satellite television in Europe tonight at this exact time.
How small can the dish be now, given the power of the satellite?
2 meters. It costs about $10,000 in Europe.
Uh-huh. There are plans afoot here in the United States for a large-scale DBS pattern where the dishes will be right down to like 2 feet across and marketed at a very low rate, maybe $100, as low as $100, and it's a pattern of very widespread use of direct broadcast satellite contemplated by the ComSat Corporation, certainly, and we also have another one, United Satellite Television here in the United States, that is about to launch a system where they're trying to get the dishes down, I think, close to about 3 feet, and it's within a marketing range. The dish itself would be to where it could arrive at the individual home in a marketable pattern. Can you see that developing in Britain? A 3-meter dish is still a very large investment and so forth.
So that's the size of satellite up at the moment, but
Yes.
BBC expect to be broadcasting around 1986 or 87 on satellites of similar power, which will involve little 60-centimeter dishes. The French and the Germans are at the moment constructing their satellites, which they hope will be operating around 1985 to 86 on perhaps 3 channels per country. So we're following very much, and of course the interest from programmers is that if in America, let us say, half the homes will eventually be on cable, what about the half which are not? So you've got a large audience out in the country who will not be connected. And of course this is very important when you consider ratings, because all the television which is picked up on cable systems, there may be 10, 20 or 30 channels. Nicholas Melleish, who you heard from earlier, his system in Britain is planning, I think, 30 program channels. Well, our point of view, this isn't very good news, because our service is in competition with 30 others, and therefore our ratings will be very low, 2, 3, 4, 5%. So we need the satellite to give us the huge coverage, because if we can get 2 or 3 or 4% of the 20 million TV homes in the whole of Europe which are on cable, then we have a viable market. But of course those people who are on direct broadcast satellites, that's the high power ones coming in 85, 86, they will have people out in the country who perhaps can only pick up 2 or 3 or 4 off-air signals. So their ratings will be much higher. So that's where the battle will move shortly.
I see. I think Ed wanted to say something here.
A couple questions, but one, as you know, we've had some traumas in the cable industry as far as CBS cable goes, and now RCTV, the entertainment channel. I'd be curious to see what messages you may be reading from that, and also in your industry, Channel 4, the response that you've had with the viewers and that, if that says anything to you as far as your plans in this industry.
I think it's worth saying that there's an even more worrying example than Channel 4, and that is our commercial breakfast television channel, which has been having a great problem with the ratings. It's been getting less than 500,000 viewers, and that relies on advertising. It's interesting. I've got a book here that was edited by one of the senior executives of the BBC, Brian Wenham, The Third Age of Broadcasting. It was published about mid-1982, but it's got a quote here from ABC Inc., which said, in the future, only those who can profit from a small audience will be able to profit at all in regard to cable television. And I think the big issue in Britain with cable television is going to be the economics of it. The reason that the government is keen to encourage cable television in Britain is as part of their information technology strategy. And I don't think anybody in the UK would disagree about the desirability of that. But in order to fuel the engine for that through the private sector, of course, they are having to make certain goodies available to companies like Nick Melleish's company, which gives them the opportunity to sell entertainment on cable television. The big question really is whether the actual economics of it will make that viable enough. And some of us, and I'm certainly one of them, believe that some of the non-entertainment functions, which the government is holding up as good examples of why we should have cable in Britain, namely in the information technology field, can already be served by other technologies that we've got available in Britain. For example, some of the interactive services that get well publicised on cable are potentially available through the public system that we have in this country, the view data system called Prestel. That is one possibility, and I've got here on the rostrum, I don't know whether Peter Marshall can cue it in. This is the sleeve of a video disc that Thorny MI have produced. It's not not sure yet what's going to happen about the marketing of it on the motor car maintenance. Now this has all sorts of interactive possibilities, and I would believe that developments of this kind may well supersede some of the things that the government sees cable performing.
Is the disc as anywhere near ubiquitous as the video cassette recorders, and what is the marketing pattern of the disc as we begin to look ahead? Is it beginning to pick up there as it is here?
There's a great deal of controversy surrounds the video disc. As you know, in America and the same in Britain, it's been very slow to take off, but some of us say that the video disc is different. It's different from video cassettes, and it's a difficulty getting the public to recognize this. The video revolution in video cassettes didn't start to happen until about 8 years after the introduction of the first commercial video recorder. The same sort of pattern is happening with the video disc. But I understand that the statistics from the States would suggest that now the video disc is beginning to pick up, and I think we will see the video disc becoming a very important medium in the future as a consumer product, because you can do all kinds of things with video discs that you can't do with video cassettes. In the longer term they will be much cheaper, they have infinite life, unlike video cassettes, much superior quality, and I think they're going to really be a very important mass medium that's different from anything else we've experienced before.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're likely to see a great expansion of video disc marketing here over what it has been. The cassette has been far more the the pattern historically, but it's undoubtedly going to be more and more of the video disc coming into play here as well. Yeah.
Can I pick up on a point that
Please.
cropped up rather frequently here? That's the role of government in some of the things we've been talking about. It may have given you the impression that government retains a pretty tight hold over the telecommunications and broadcasting activities in Britain. The real impression we want to convey is that there's a very great trend in the opposite direction here now. We're seeing a freeing of government holds over broadcasting and telecommunications. We're seeing the main communications carrier in Britain, British Telecommunications, moving towards privatisation, and now a competitor being permitted in the telecommunications field for the first time called Mercury. We're seeing government relaxing its hold on areas in broadcasting, particularly in satellite fields, and no one actually has done more to move us in that direction than Brian Haynes, and I'm sure you'd be interested to hear some of the experiences that he would be able to tell you about in working through some of the regulatory barriers that have existed in this country and elsewhere in Europe, but which are gradually going away, which is why I said at the outset of the statement a moment ago that we'd like to give you the impression that government is relaxing its hold over telecommunications here in Europe.
Yes, we have something called the European Community, and one of its main points is that there's some free flow of services between member states. And luckily, television and television advertising has been defined by the European Court as a service. But it's a bit like when in England we had canal owners a couple of hundred years ago, and then the railways came along, and there was a sort of battle between the systems. So we have the existing broadcasters who quite understandably are protecting their monopolies. At the same time, our friends want to dig up the road and give us 30 channels on cable. So much of the legislation has formed over the last 20 or 30 years, and it takes perhaps 3 or 4 years for governments to pass new legislation, and we have the technology moving much faster at the moment than the administrative processes can keep up. So I and Nicholas here and John and Peter are chivying away, saying, look, the technology and the rockets and the systems and the fibre optics and the video discs can give us these opportunities. Why can't we use them? And because unemployment is one of the big problems in Europe, I think that message is now going in, certainly to all the industry ministers in Europe, but then it hits the ministers of religion and the ministers of culture who aren't quite so sure if it's a good idea.
One of the ironies, to my mind, of all these new developments in communications is that the video cassette, for example, and indeed the video disc in the future, is developed by corporations who put it on the market and sell it. It has an enormous impact, obviously, on broadcasting. If you can go out and rent a movie, you're not going to watch the television so often. And all this happens with barely a complaint from anybody, and without any possibility of the government being able to control it. Now, as soon as Brian Haynes wants to transmit by satellite, as soon as I want to dig up the roads and put in a cable system, there's an immediate outcry that this new dimension in communications is going to destroy life as we know it.
But hang on, I would slightly disagree with Nicholas Melleish there that, okay, video cassettes have had an easy ride so far, but there is quite a bit of pressure building up to suggest that the video industry should pay more for its entertainment. And one of the propositions that is being looked at is the idea of introducing a levy on blank tape that would help to pay for some of our ailing film industry activities. This has already happened in Sweden. The Swedish Film Institute now gets a percentage from all blank tape sales and also from pre-recorded. One proposal that is being examined in Britain is that there might be a levy introduced onto blank tape. And this would help to fund some of our film industry activities, because the film industry claims, and I think with a great deal of justification, that television doesn't pay enough for film industry products, and this would help to bolster up its ailing economy. Another idea that's being examined also is the suggestion that when feature films are put on broadcast television, that there should be a levy of 0.25 pence per viewer that actually watches that film, that goes back into the film industry. And
Yeah,
it is an important...
I was just going to say that has come up in the United States, and some people have said that some of those blank cassettes are used for home movie development and so forth, and they oughtn't have to pay a fee for programming that they're going to be developing on their own, as it were.
Yes, but you could apply that argument to whiskey as well. I mean, whiskey is used for medicinal purposes too.
Right, I suppose, yeah, yeah.
No, I think it's a very important point because, believe me, I don't think anybody would disagree about this, that broadcast television and the video industry and the cable industry wouldn't be where it is today if it hadn't been for the movie business.
Oh, absolutely.
And therefore it's very important that the movie business, which traditionally has depended upon its income from the cinema, which is now under enormous attack from all sides, should have adequate financial support, at least during this transitional phase. Maybe ultimately free market forces should be allowed to take over, but to make a sudden transition without any kind of protection at all for the movie industry could be in the long term damaging for television, video and the cable industry.
You don't think there might be lessons learned in a certain sense from the experience here in the United States that we've had with that? We've been grappling with these questions here in the United States as well. I wonder.
I think I think the first thing to recognize, I think John said right at the beginning, is that of course society and conditions in general in this country are very different from those in the States. The fact that we speak more or less the same language leads a lot of people to think that life is just the same here as there, and it is very, very different indeed. I think, I mean, one aspect which we've already touched on is the difference, not so much in the quality of broadcast television in the two countries, but the difference in type. Now, over here we have a much more limited range of broadcast channels. There are much fewer channels available. This means the broadcasters have to put out a very mixed diet, ranging right from soap operas up to grand opera, all on the one channel. Whereas in the States you've got a wider diversity of channels. So if you're thinking of cable programming, you're certainly trying to find something over here which is complementary to, additional to, that which you can get off air. And that type of service may, I think certainly to quite a degree, will be very different to what is successful in the States. Certainly, I would certainly agree that feature films are the primary instrument in both countries. But I think there may well be channels for cable developing over here that would look to you very much like an independent broadcast TV station in the States. Now, to
Yes.
such a service on cable over there would obviously be crazy because you've got the services available free. We don't have that type of service in this country.
Yes, I see. We would be able to move as you have more channel capacity, particularly as we have in some of the cable systems here where we get up to 30 or 50 or even technologically the capability of 100 channels. You obviously begin to move into areas what we call narrow casting to a relatively small audience within the overall market, so that it permits of very specialized kinds of programming. Ted Turner's News Network and Westinghouse has an all-news network here that's going very well in this country. So this is something might also tie in with you gentlemen, because you've all been, certainly Viznews has been very, very involved in a pioneering sense on a global scale in terms of news development. Do you think there might be opportunities, or I just wonder if you could comment on the possibility of narrowcasting that these new technologies might bode?
The opportunities for news in cable expansion is a thing that my company is looking at very closely, and so are several other companies in Britain and elsewhere in Europe. Whether the market in Europe is right for a news channel of the CNN or SNC type as you have in the States is a thing still to be tested. But that is certainly one of the things that we've been looking at very closely. Whether we should imitate what you've done in the States, of course, is another matter. I think we should more learn from your experiences and then shape our own future in the fields of satellite and cable, rather than simply borrow from the things that are happening in the States. We're starting from a very different base over here. For example, it may not be known to everyone watching your program that Britain still has only 4 television channels. We only had 3 until last year. Elsewhere in Europe they have fewer than that. There are mostly only 2 channels in most European countries. So the arrival of both video and then cable is entering a rather different sort of marketplace from the one in the States. And we're also as John Chittock mentioned earlier, used to, on the whole, much higher quality programming. That is, in technical terms and in production terms. I think that's across the whole range of broadcasting that people are used to in Europe. And I think we're unashamed of saying that, and we don't want to see, with the proliferation of more channels of more choice, which everyone wants, degradation of quality in our programming in Europe. We want to see the quality that has been developed in British television over the last 30, 40 years.
Well, we on our side would not want to see any degradation in the quality of British television, because it's provided us certainly with some of the very best television programming that's graced the American television screens here, and we'd be in complete accord with you on that regard. It was perhaps more the matter of being able to develop narrowcasting to a relatively small audience, and I wonder if Mr. Chittock might comment. We have in this country a narrowcasting channel called Financial News Network that goes directly to the investor community or people who have an interest in that, so that it's much more specialized than your more generalized patterns of programming that television programming in a network sense generally has. But the possibility of narrowcasting, for instance, beyond just the news, but let's say to the news of interest to the investment community as one pattern of programming that a number of people in this country are finding interesting.
I think I have to remind you that the population in the UK is much smaller than in the States, and I think the real issue that may face the cable television developments in this country on an economic basis is whether in fact the smaller audience that we have in Britain will be able to support the sums for cable television, because cable television cannot, by the very nature of the medium, earn income other than by its immediate transmission along those cables to the audience at the other end. Now, the film industry and the broadcast television industry, it makes some of its revenue by the license fee or by advertising or by cinema admissions in Britain, but also a very important part of its revenue comes from selling those programs to overseas television. And in fact, British films will only perhaps earn about 4% of their potential revenue within the shores of the UK if they get a full international release. So it's important to remember that Britain is a small country, and I believe that the opportunities for very narrowcast cable television services are going to face a very difficult economic time, especially when one has alternative means of providing that on a much more selective basis without all the capital costs involved with cable, namely, as I said before, video cassettes and video discs.
A closer analogy to your experience in the States is to look at the whole of Europe. And this is just what Brian's been doing.
Yes, well, this is very important, and John started on the correct premise. You see, if you wanted to do a Ted Turner news, and if you expect the cable companies, some in Zurich, for instance, already have 11 channels. In Amsterdam, I think they're up to 15. So again, you're going to get low ratings. So immediately you've got the problem of language. That what language are you going in? How many people understand English, or how many understand German? And even when you come to movies, the Motion Picture Export Association of America have some very interesting graphs showing that major box office successes in Holland bomb out south of Lyon in Paris, France. So you have a situation where there are like a large number of small communities, and if you're going to do specialist channels, like a health channel, for instance, or a business channel, or a news channel, you've got a severe problem on how big an audience you could attract and whether it would be sufficiently large to pay, because in America you've got one culture and one language, even though you may only have, I think, whatever it is, 20 or 30 million homes on cable there out of your 100 million. So these are very important, and this is why I think the pattern of programming will be much different in Europe, because at the end of the day it has to pay for itself. And you may get a large number of small local operations and not so many of the sort of trans-European ones.
Yes. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that the difference, really, essential difference between cable television and video is that cable television has got to get its audience instantly. It's got to get a minimum number of people at that instant of time, otherwise the economics of it won't work out. Video can spend 5 years getting its audience. It doesn't have to be at that instant of time.
There have been some experiments in pan-European programming taking place in Europe under the auspices of the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union. And when the transmission took place for a whole week in London, Viznews was the headquarters for the operation. And we had the problem of transmitting 5 hours of television a night for a week in 6 different languages. So we had 6 commentary booths working simultaneously to try to put out what was a program acceptable across most of Europe. But that was only 6 languages out of a possible, 17?
Well, in fact, technology is coming to our aid somewhat. And if you said, for instance, perhaps what are a common denominator of interest, and perhaps sport is one, you've got a large amount of commonality in Europe. And the satellites which are going up, there is a new EBU, that's the European Broadcasting Union standard, which has, I think, for 5 soundtracks, and you have a little decoder which can unscramble them. Now this is fine if you're doing commentaries, or maybe if you're doing a news with the presenter out of picture. But obviously if you're doing a film, you've got all sorts of problems, because in some countries dubbing is thought to be the best way to do it. In others, they hate it and they prefer subtitles. And there are all sorts of crafty things of cutting out odd frames to make the words in different languages the same length to fit what the actors are saying. So quite how you'll get the economy of scale here isn't yet certain.
It's worth mentioning that Brian Haynes mentioned sport. The broadcasters in this country have had a recent shaking up because a smallish company in Britain called Teleconference has just recently made an offer of £8 million to the Football Association for the rights to put soccer matches onto video rather than them going to the broadcast television companies. Whether in fact this will happen remains to be seen, but the idea that Teleconference have is to put video projectors in pubs all over the country and in clubs, and to sell advertising, so that if you want to see Saturday afternoon's soccer match, which at the moment you can see on Saturday evening on broadcast television, there is a possibility you'll have to go to your local pub instead to see it on the Monday evening. The broadcasters are obviously up in arms about this, very worried about it, because some important sporting events now could be denied them.
Yes, and this is where you immediately get into auctions, and of course the profits of the companies at the moment are in a sense subsidised, because there's a gentleman's agreement here that the monopoly broadcasters will only pay a certain amount, the minimum, for programmes. But of course, once someone like comes along, as John has just explained, suddenly you're in an auction situation, and you could find some profitable commercial companies have to spend their money in an auction for the rights which they need to hold their audience, and this could apply to stars. I mean, I think we've got, was it Barbara Walters there, who was earning something like, whatever it is, $2 million a year or a century or an hour. Now we don't have that yet, because we don't have enough channels to create the auction situation. So I think the economics of running television here are going to change very quickly.
We have had the sporting events, prize fights and so forth carried to a select audience within theaters or into areas that have operated ad hoc very often and entrepreneurially very successfully here. That's been a pattern that we have dealt with, particularly with something like a heavyweight boxing match or something of that sort. Yeah.
Yes, but that may be a sort of pay-as-you-view situation. I mean, what has happened here is that the world sporting federations have now got so fed up with the low amount of money they're being paid by the national broadcasters that they are forming their own satellite company in Europe, so that they themselves will own the channel upon which they can put their own product. And so this shows how the rights holders, be they the opera like Covent Garden or the sporting people or maybe the Olympics, once there are more channels, either through home cassettes or through cable or through satellite, the people who own the rights at the end of the day have the whip hands. And that's why I think we'll see American film majors moving into Europe. You have a lot of experience with cable companies specialising in movies there, and I think we'll shortly see them in Europe.
These are all examples of the changes that are now taking place in Europe, because it's a very exciting place to be at the moment. Everywhere you look, there are new ideas. Old traditional formats are going out of the window. The old broadcasters who used to hold the sway and everything in Europe are now seeing new competitors appearing. Brian Haynes' company is the first that actually got on the air as a new broadcaster. But once we have the European satellites fully operational, and the first one is due to be launched in June of this year, we will quite rapidly have the proliferation of the equivalent of your domestic satellite channels available in Europe, and many of them will bring new broadcasters onto the scene, which will bring in new pressures, new competitions, and the soccer example that John Chittock gave with the telejector is just a sort of chipping away at the old order in Europe, and it's going to be very different 3 or 4 years from now.
It would seem that on a global scale we are indeed coming into an informational environment, and that these new technologies which are coming in the minds of some almost exponentially now as they begin to touch one and the other. This video conference is an example of that in a very real sense. It is a marvel of telecommunications capability, really is ushering in major changes in terms of some of the traditional patterns that could hopefully bode well for one and all, those with very high standards of traditional production capability and those with some new opportunities that could be provided by the emerging telecommunications capabilities, don't you feel?
But I would say that in Britain particularly, that this is a traumatic experience, and it may be difficult for Americans to fully appreciate that.
We've had our difficulties here, too, dealing with these questions, if I may submit.
Oh, yes, of course. But what I was about to say was that you see that we have been brought up to expect television to be really something rather like a public utility, where you just turn on the water tap and then it's there and you don't actually have to pay much for it. And what is happening now is that we're coming face to face with the reality that we've been getting our television at an extremely low price indeed, very high quality television, and not having to pay very much for it. The situation is now beginning to change, and I think it's going to be a very traumatic experience for...
If I may, for the American audience, you do have a licensing fee there. Maybe you could explain that to us briefly. I know it's a matter...
Indeed.
All you need to pay at the moment in order to see extremely good feature films and so on television, on broadcast television, is the annual license fee, which is under £50, and that covers the BBC's revenue, and ITV, our commercial channels, obtain their revenue from advertising. We don't have any pay channels as such, apart from these subscription experiments that Nicholas Mellish's company are involved in, and others, on cable. So we've had our television at a very, very low price indeed, £45, £48.
$75 a year.
Yes. It might be worth mentioning just in the United States that there are people who have television and there is no payment whatsoever that's received on that regular and steady way, that you do have that stream of revenue coming from the subscription base and ownership base. We haven't had that at all. There's no cost at all to watch over-the-air broadcasting, say, for instance, in New York with our commercial stations. It only becomes a matter of having a fee when you adopt to have one of the subscription systems that are being offered through cable television or subscription television from satellite or through the air, a scramble signal that can be systematically built. But there's been no fee at all for television programming as we've received it here in the United States. Hello?
Yeah, to try with
it was nice if we had a steady stream of $75 a year from each home. But in any event, I just thought I'd mention that.
I think it's worth earlier you mentioned about the wonders of new technology and so on. I would make a plea and even an observation that maybe new technology itself will flatten out. I think that there's almost been too much activity with new technology, and in the next decade, the thing we've got to be considering much more seriously is what we feed into the new technology, the program making and the standards of program making, and how we finance the program making. And a lot of companies are investing in all of this activity, and I would say to those who want to invest in the future, they should be looking more at the programming side of it, because programming is almost rather like coconuts or oil. It's a commodity, and the one thing that we are now going to experience in the next 25 years that we haven't in the last 25 years is that programming has matured technically and creatively to such a pitch now that it will have a much longer shelf life and will therefore earn money over a much longer period of time than has been the case in the past.
Yeah, that's true of everything except news, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. No, that could be interesting as well. In fact, I would remind you that the Sunday Times and ITN, our commercial news channel, once a year now are publishing a video cassette of the year's news, and I've no doubt in 10 years' time they'll put a premium on it.
Yes. But of course, at the end of the day, people don't watch satellites and cables and cassettes. They watch programs. So it comes down to trying to work out, are you going to have some major popular channels which you can support in Europe, which, as I said earlier, is a very fragmented market compared to your size in America? Or what specialist or narrow channels are you going to find? And quite the balance between them is the challenge for the next 10 years to see how it's going to work out.
I can bring a point, an agreement here that in the conferences that we attend here in the States on DBS, etc., you hear the plans that, and they may cost $20 million, then you hear the programming, which may cost $50 million. Programming always seems to be the subject. Everybody, no matter what the technology you build, programming, it still comes back to that. One concern I have, looking at it from the United States perspective and dealing with U.S. customers for Viznews, etc., we are constantly looking at programming, and the Americans, American producers per se, and the American distributors are rubbing their hands and saying there's a tremendous market there. And obviously, the many independent producers in England are doing the same, looking at their own market. Again, it boils down to that question. One, I've heard you mention movies, but and obviously it's what the public is going to view most readily. But other quality program, informational programming, is it going to get a chance? And will American programming, for better or for worse, appear more on British TV?
Oh, I'm sure that, I mean, movies are the thing that are the programming that fuel this activity. I certainly believe, and I'm sure my colleagues here would agree, that, that people may get a little bit tired of just movies. There's plenty of other things, and some of which you've seen in the States. We have sort of dramatized documentaries which have been very successful. We have had historical television programs on the historical things. The Search for the Nile, I'm not sure if that was seen in the States, about Livingstone. The Darwin series, magnificent, based on reality, and then we move into other areas where we get very good documentary material on television, which I'm sure more and more people are going to want in the future. And then there's the whole area of self-improvement. We have in Britain, it hasn't been mentioned so far, the Open University.
Yes, I was just going to say we had been attempting to have Mr. Horlock join us there at the convention. He wasn't able to get down from the Midlands where he was, but in a future date he certainly wants to. The British Open University is a model for the world.
Yes, well, I mean, funnily enough, I was telling my friends here that on Monday I've been asked to give the keynote speech at York University to the Educate Television Association's annual conference on the highly erudite subject of television and the individual learner. Now, this implies, and I'm sure with some good judgment, that in the future there is going to be a very important use for television for the individual, sitting alone, isolated in his home with a television screen and not a tutor in sight, as an important way of learning. And of course, this is what's happening already with the Open University, because the Open University television programs are going out after broadcast television shuts down, and it becomes an important part of the total course that you can enroll for at the Open University, where you can take a degree while still being at work during the day.
We've had the pleasure of doing an interview with Lord Walter Perry, who had a large hand in starting the Open University and followed its developments pretty carefully, or I have here. I would think that we ought to be doing a great deal more of that kind of really very serious programming and putting a very serious perception into a video format, because it is possible to get the thought and representation of some of our best minds into a video format. And the educational implications of this, apart from the entertainment and so forth, really are quite amazing, and maybe in the end is the final bottom line. It's a matter of national or international educational processes that these technologies may be affording us all.
Yes, it's worth noting that the Open University in Britain is beginning to look much more seriously at video as perhaps becoming one of its prime methods of distribution. Broadcast television may be merely just another vehicle that is used for bicycling the programs around the country. I mean, one suggestion that hasn't yet been initiated is that Open University programs should go out in what has been called the dark hours, from midnight until 6 o'clock in the next morning, when the airwaves are not being used, and students can just simply put their video recorders on the time clock to just record the programs they want.
That would be
marvelous, if I may, Mr. Chick, but there aren't that many video cassettes in the universe here yet, and that is a good idea, and it certainly could be done institutionally. I had also thought one of the unique qualities that cable and subscription television affords us here in the United States is the ability to put programming to the audience in a manner where they can be systematically billed, rather than being just depending upon advertising as traditionally we have. And it always occurred to me that a channel or a system of communication educationally relevant programming content might be very, very viable, in that people are accustomed to paying a certain tuition in terms of education. That had occurred to me. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but there certainly is a role for that kind of development here in the United States.
The video penetration in the States will reach substantial levels, and the video will become as commonplace in the home eventually as the television set.
Point, I wonder if I could, I'm terribly sorry, we do in cable television have a great deal more bandwidth and more carrying capacity and so forth, but we do, even in cable television, run out of time from time to time available to us. I'm afraid we've run out of time for the time allotted for this cable television broadcast here in the United States. So I wonder if I might just then thank you all very, very much for participating in this, what is the first of, let's hope, many transatlantic communications between telecommunications, people of telecommunications interest there. If I could once again just say that it's been our pleasure to have the perceptions of Mr. Peter Marshall, representative of Viznews, and we have John Chittock, the writer on film and video for the Financial Times of London, Brian Haynes, the director of, the chairman of, again, Satellite Television, and Mr. Melleish of Redifussion, Rediffusion, Nicholas Melleish of Rediffusion, a major cable interest in Britain. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much indeed for participating. It's been a great pleasure talking with you. I'd say that this is quite an incredible system that the Intercontinental Hotel and the ComSat people have put together. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
I really do thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to being in continuing communication with you and your colleagues there, and wish you all the very best of luck as we begin to move into this telecommunications future, which is indeed really very, very exciting.
Right. Good. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. But nice to talk to you.